Okay, hello, this is video lecture number 39, and today we are covering the women's rights movement. We've got a few sections for you today. The first is the origins of the women's movement, and then we're going to look at abolitionist women, and then finally the program of Seneca Falls and beyond. So, in the female-centered middle-class home, women were indeed insulated from the workplace. But their new roles as moral stewards of their families suggested new responsibilities and authority. The moral reform movements of the early 19th century provided these women with a forum for the advancement of their rights as individuals and opportunities to assert equality with men in discussions of public policy. The anti-slavery movement projected a striking analogy between the dominion of master over slave and the dominion of man over woman. As women reformers noted, all the evils of the former applied to the latter. The participation of women in public discussions of government policy implied that women deserved the full rights of citizenship, most prominently property rights and the right to vote. Women made significant progress in acquiring property rights, but women's suffrage proved far more elusive. Even in reform circles, the agitation for women's rights produced deep divisions. The assertion of female equality in the American Anti-Slavery Society, for example, contributed to a major schism in the ranks of abolitionists in the 1840s. Many male reformers, and even a number of female reformers who embraced the equality of the races as a moral principle, turned a deaf ear to advocates for women's rights. Nevertheless, perceptions of women's proper place began to shift, however haltingly. So let's have a closer look at this, starting with the origins of the women's movement. During the American Revolution, the belief arose that women should limit their political role to that of Republican mothers, who would instruct their sons in the principles of liberty and government. A woman should inhabit a separate sphere made up of her home and members of her family. Now, many middle-class women transcended these rigid boundaries by joining in the Second Great Awakening, through which they gained authority and influence over many areas of family life, including the timing of pregnancies. Some women used their newfound religious authority to increase their involvement outside the home, beginning with programs of moral reform. The American Female Moral Reform Society, founded in 1834 and led by Lydia Finney, had as its goals ending prostitution, redeeming fallen women, and protecting single women from moral corruption. Women also tried to reform social institutions, such as almshouses, asylums, hospitals, and jails. Dorothea Dix was a leader in these efforts. Northern women supported the movement led by Horace Mann to increase the number of public elementary schools and improve their quality. Catherine Beecher, the intellectual leader of a new corps of women teachers, argued that women were the best qualified to instruct the young. By the 1850s, most teachers were women, in part because of Beecher's arguments, but also because women could be paid less than men. Our next section then is abolitionist women. Maria W. Stewart, a follower of William Lloyd Garrison and an African American, lectured to mixed audiences in the early 1830s. White women also began to deliver abolitionist lectures. Harriet Jacobs' Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl and Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin graphically depicted the special horrors of slavery for women. A few women began to challenge the subordinate status of their sex. The most famous were Angelina and Sarah Grimke, who used Christian and Enlightenment principles to claim equal civic rights for women. By 1840, female abolitionists were asserting that traditional gender roles amounted to the domestic slavery of women. Drawn into public life by abolitionism, thousands of Northern women had become firm advocates of greater rights, not only for enslaved African Americans, but also for themselves. Our last section is the program of Seneca Falls and beyond. During the 1840s, women's rights activists, often with support from affluent men, tried to strengthen the legal rights of married women. 3 states enacted Married Women's Property Acts between 1839 and 1845, and in 1848, New York statute gave a woman full legal control over the property she brought into a marriage, which eventually became the model for similar laws in 14 other states. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott organized a gathering in Seneca Falls, New York, that outlined a coherent statement of women's equality. The Seneca Falls activists relied on the Declaration of Independence, and they repudiated the idea that the assignment of separate spheres for men and women was the natural order of society. In 1850, the first National Women's Rights Convention began to hammer out a reform program and began a concerted campaign for more legal rights and to win the vote for women. Susan B. Anthony joined the women's rights movement and eventually created a network of female political captains or leaders who lobbied state legislatures for greater women's rights. In 1860, New York granted women a few rights. The right to collect and spend their own wages, to bring a lawsuit in court, and to control property they brought into their marriage in the event they became widows. Okay, so that's it for video lecture number 39. Please continue on with your reading, answer the review questions, and continue taking your notes.